Awesome. All right. So hello, everyone. Today's agenda is first, I will highlight some Lens 4.0 release new features, what we have done there. It was released, was it over 1 week ago? So it's quite fresh. So let's have a quick look what's in Lens 4.0. And then we have I will show how to build Lens extension. I have an example extension that I will share for you. All right, so I'm Lauri Nevala, and I'm a staff engineer at Mirantis and one of the core developers of Lens application. And actually, this background image is taken almost a little bit over 1 year ago, and where we released the Lens application IDE first time. So it's now the project is over one year old, and I think we have gone quite far since we released this first time. All right, you can find me with this handle on Twitter and GitHub. If you need to ping me there, please go ahead. So Lens 4.0 is fresh from the oven, and there are two major changes that we included into release. And the first thing is improved logs interface, and then the extensions API. And other changes, we added mechanism for users that have limited access to cluster, way to define accessible namespaces. Typically or normally, if user doesn't have access to list namespaces, he can or she can define that in kubeconfig file. But if you have access to multiple namespaces, there's not way to share that information to Lens application or even in kubectl. You need to know that beforehand. So we added mechanism so that users can define those in cluster settings, all available namespaces that user has access, and Lens will show those namespaces. And then we added a tray icon to give quick access to Lens dashboard while it's not active. And other minor changes, now it's allowed to restart deployments or scale stateful sets. Previously, you could only scale deployments directly from Lens dashboard, but now it's for stateful sets too. Then you can search IP ports by IP on the list view, and we changed the default Helm repository to use Bitnami instead of deprecated stable repository. And there are tons of other small changes and bug fixes. You can see all those from the release notes. But let's take a quick look on those major changes. So previously, the Lens IDE showed all pod logs in a modal dialog, and that basically blocked all the interaction with the rest of the UI. You were only stick to that log dialog. So in 4.0, we moved those logs to the dock area on the bottom of the application, where already are present terminal and resource editor. So the logs are displayed there now as well. And since we done that, it allows to have multiple logs open in separate tabs, and then you can open resource details or basically any other view while logs are visible. So it's not blocking that. You can check the pod status and whatnot that is interesting based on logs. And now you can also see logs from previous containers of that pod. And the log stream is actually real time, so it will constantly update the logs, and you can scroll up and Lens will fetch new logs from the past simultaneously while you are seeing those logs. And then there's now search functionality. So you can actually search some entries in the logs. I will show this in a demo shortly. Okay, and then we published first extensions API. And what are those extensions? So those maybe this extensions API may be used by the community and cloud native ecosystem vendors to develop Lens extensions. And also organization can leverage the extensions to develop their own features to Lens UI and add functionalities that are important for those organizations. So this extensions API work started already in 3.6 series, where we refactored quite many pieces in order to support these extensions. So it has been quite huge work that we have done, and now it's the initial version is now ready. But of course, we will constantly update and leverage the extensions API. So what those extensions are capable? Those can present some global pages, add some items to status bar of Lens app, add cluster pages that are visible on cluster dashboards. They can add new object details for Kubernetes resources, add some application preferences or cluster features, etc. Let's come back to this later on a extensions guide part. And like I said, new capabilities will be added in future releases for sure. So this is only the start. All right, let's see those features in action. So I have one cluster dashboard here, and the logs part is now visible when I open this logs. So it's now visible on the bottom of the application, like I said. So now we can use the whole screen for the logs, and it's constantly updating. We can switch between containers, or we can toggle timestamps. We can see logs from previous containers. And we can search. So if we look, for example, with admin, it will highlight all the items, and we can iterate these by pressing enter or mouse click. And in future, we will enhance this so that actually you can see logs from, for example, now it's only available for ports, but in future you are able to see the logs, aggregated logs from deployments and demo sets and whatnot. So, but this is the first step to that direction that we needed to do first. All right, and then some extensions. Let's close this. So what those extensions can be, this is to give you some idea about those. So for example, extension can add some details to Kubernetes resource details. For example, here we can see extension that will show the node location on the map. And of course, we can use this same mechanism to show all nodes on the map, and maybe even all clusters in the map in a global page. Then here's what Daniel already mentioned and told more about. It's about this starboard extension. It's also adding details to Kubernetes resources. At this case, it's adding those on deployments. So we can see here the reports that starboard is generating and seeing immediately what are the issues with this deployment. Like here's WordPress has 5 critical issues, and those reports are also listed in a dedicated section of starboard extension. And this starboard is quite good example because it's also adding a cluster feature. So basically you install something that is deployed into the Kubernetes cluster when you install this feature. And then we can also, for example, visualize Kubernetes resources and their relations. So for example, here we are seeing resources from all namespaces and how those are linked. And if they are installed from Helm, we can see that too, and what resources the Helm release actually has deployed. And this is very cool. If you have any errors in your Kubernetes config files, for example, we can see here immediately that this Kubernetes service has something wrong in the config. It's missing the pod relation. So most likely the selector part is broken. So we can immediately fix that. What is very cool showcase also is you can have a space invaders. This is actually a example of chaos engineering. If you are familiar with kube invaders, so this is ported to lens extension. So actually all invaders here are ports in the cluster. and we can start shooting those down. And what we are seeing here, that we can see that the cluster is actually restarting those containers or deploying those. So this extensions API is quite capable already. So you can use your imagination how you can utilize that. And of course, if you see something is missing, come to talk to us, so we can improve this. So your extension ideas can be implemented as well.
There's a couple of questions that came up in the chat. One is the visualization created using one of the components offered by Lens extension or some external library?
It's an external library that is used on that. We are exposing some components from Lens core, so there are certain components that are shared from Lens application, so you can use those components, and you can see all documentation, API documentation, and components that are available on our documentation site.
And then another question was, can an extension access to other clusters outside the current cluster that's being viewed?
It depends. At this moment, if you want to have something that is cross-cluster thing, you can add this global page that is actually, it's then filling this whole Lens application window, and there you can reach all clusters and display some information from there.
And then there's another question. Can we have extensions per Kubernetes cluster?
Yes and no. I'm not sure is it already implemented, but if not, we are adding some mechanism how extension can know and decide is it active on the cluster. So for example, there is no point to have extension activated on that kind of cluster where, for example, needed CRDs are not present. So then the extension can itself decide is it visible or not.
Any other questions from the group? So we have more questions coming. So there's a question from the global page, can we access data of other clusters?
If I remember correctly, you can, but I think please check it out from the documentation. So there is mechanism how you can access the cluster by providing the cluster to method call, and it will return to cluster context for you, and you can then basically fetch anything from the Kubernetes API. But yeah, so short answer, I'm not sure. Please check it out, and or ping me later. I will dig the information for you how that can be done.
Okay, and we have a question. Does the page extension show all the menus that we normally see?
Extension can show all the menus. Not sure what do you mean about this question.
Richard, can you explain what you mean?
Yes, so regarding to the cross cluster functionality, you mentioned that I could see it other clusters through a page extension. When I am in a page extension, can I still see like workloads, configuration network from that page extension, or you mentioned that it used the entire page? That is my doubt.
So the global page is it's like this add clusters view that we are seeing, and extension can fetch information from all the clusters that are added to this Lens application, and based on that, you can basically display information from the cluster. Of course, it depending on what access the user who is using the Lens has to those clusters. So you can only display that data that the user is capable to see or allowed to see.
All right, that answers my question. Thank you.
About the extension that detects that the given workload is MySQL already provided based URL visualizing data. Yeah, this is a Node.js. So if you have credentials to databases stored in Kubernetes cluster, and you can and are allowed to fetch those credentials, and you can programmatically connect to those databases. So why not? You can do that. I'm not saying that it's simple to do, but yeah, if you are able to fetch that data, then yes, it's possible to visualize the data from databases. About extension security, we will provide marketplace for extensions. We didn't manage to get it for 4.0 release, but I'm sure there we will add some labels to extensions, and of course, first all extensions that are in that marketplace are somehow checked beforehand that those are secure. And there might be also some other labels that we will add those extensions that users would benefit. But yeah.
All right, any other questions?
All right, maybe we can go to extension part. I'm sure you will have more questions after these slides. So, and hopefully this will also answer to your questions if you had something already. All right, so let's take a little deeper dive into Lens extensions. What are those and how to build extensions? So Lens extensions are NPM packages, and those are developed in TypeScript. Lens is using React for UI components and MobX for state management. So those are provided to Lens extensions by Lens application itself. And the Lens extensions API exposes it provides registration hooks to register capabilities for extensions. And it also provides some React components that you can reuse from Lens application. And it provides access to Kubernetes resources and store to persist data and some common color definitions. So you will have common look and feel with the rest of the Lens application if you use those both components and color definitions. So what do you need to get started? First, you need to have Node.js installed on your machine. And if you are cloning our extension samples, they are found in GitHub. You need Git for that. And then you need some sort of text editor. VS Code is quite good for that. And we are using Webpack to compile Lens, and it's also used for compile extensions. Or those extensions need at least be compatible with Webpack system. And then about extensions anatomy. So basically, because extensions are NPM packages, they need to have some manifest and then some entry file that is executed. Because Lens is an Electron application, an Electron application basically have two processes running. One is main process that is running on the background, and the other one is renderer process that is taking care of the UI part of the system. So you can have entry files for both of those processes. And then, of course, you most likely have also some additional source files that are implementing the business logic of your extension. So the extension manifest. Each Lens extension must have a Package.json file for the manifest. With Lens extension, it contains a mix of Node.js fields that are standard for or required for NPM packages, and including scripts and dependencies of your extension. And then there are few Lens-specific fields in the manifest or Package.json file. Then the extension must have one, and it can have two separate entry files. So it has to be or has to have entry point either for my main process or renderer process. But of course, it can have both if the extensions have some functionalities on both processes. So why not? And for those entry files, we have a base classes that those extensions, your own extension classes, entry classes must extend. For main process, we have a Lens main extension, and for renderer, we have a Lens renderer extension base classes. And your entry classes must extend those in order to extension is working. And both of those base classes have onActivate and onDeactivate methods. So onActivate method is called when the extension is loaded, and you can initialize there your stuff like classes or variables or whatever you need. And onDeactivate is called when the extension is unloaded, and it's a good place to free some resources if you have reserved or created some variables or classes, objects for your extension. All right, and if your extension is running on main process, in addition its own functionalities, it can register add menus. And those add menu items are displayed on OS native menu. So it's the standard one, and you can add some items there. And for renderer extensions, there are a few more capabilities. Like I mentioned, one is the global pages, and those are visible on Lens main window. Then extension can register some application preferences, then some cluster pages, and those cluster pages are visible on cluster dashboards, like these. So those resource map or Cube Invader. And then extension can register cluster features like this starboard did, or it has some features that are deployed to cluster when installing that feature. And then extension can register something in the status bar of Lens application, some icons or text that is visible there, and bind some functionality when clicked those items. Then extension can register some object menu items. Those are visible for Kubernetes resources. And actually we have changed, for example, those pod logs or shells to be extensions internally. So when you are clicking logs item, you will actually execute an extension, or the functionality is run inside the extension. And then you can register some details to Kubernetes objects, like the starboard was registering those vulnerability issues. And then you can also register some object status text, and those will be displayed in resource lists. For example, if now we are displaying if some resource has some errors or issues based on events that Lens is doing already, so you can have a similar kind of status text added by your extension. So let me show then how to build the extension or implement. So our target is to have some list of CRD resources. On this case, certificate CRD objects. So how to get started with extensions? So typically it starts so that you create a symlink folder under home users home folder .k8slens/extensions folder. So when adding a new folder or directory under there, Lens is automatically recognizing that, and it will offer that as an extension in extensions section of the Lens app. You can also use Yeoman Lens extension generator to generate your extension skeleton, and this generator can be found on GitHub. And then you need to have this Package.json. On our case, we will have this kind of so we have a name for our extension, and we have a renderer entry point that is using renderer.js after that is generated when we compile this extension. And it can register some metadata. Those are Lens specific, and in future there will be more Lens specific properties. And then we have some scripts to make easier to build and start or run scripts. And then we have dependencies that our extensions needs. So this is quite typical NPM package.json.
Merci, Amandine.
All right, then extension will have a couple of config files. One is ds-config.json used for TypeScript, And then we will have webpack config that defines how the extension will be compiled. And there are a couple of gotchas that you need to know. So we will use some external dependencies from Lens app. First, it is the extensions API module, and then there is React and MobX. And the story behind that is that in that way, Lens will have the same version of React running on Lens app itself and on your extension, and only one MobX instance is running when Lens app is running. So if there are multiple versions of or instances of MobX, it won't work. So this way we ensure that MobX is loaded only once. You can refer the extension samples or use the extension generator to generate these files for you. So these are quite static. You don't need to modify those. All right, and after we have this package.json, we just need to run npm install command, so it will install or download those dependencies for our extension. So next thing is that we want to actually implement our extension. That list of certificates that are displayed on a cluster dashboard. To achieve that, first we need to register some ClusterPage and ClusterPageMenu objects from our extension. And then we need to list those certificate objects from Kubernetes API. And for that, we need to define the CRD object. That is actually this CRD objects define fields that it includes. And then we need to implement the API and store objects and create CertificatePage component to render those certificate objects. And then we can customize the details panel that is opened when clicking one list item. This might sound quite huge task, but actually with Lens Extensions API, it's quite simple. So the first task was register ClusterPage and ClusterPageMenu. So we need to have some text editor. And first we implement or introduce our extension class. And at this time, we are extending it from Lens renderer extension because we are implementing something that is visible on a UI. And to register ClusterPage, we just define it. We will give some ID, that page, and define the component that actually will be rendered for this page. And similar way, we will register the ClusterPageMenu item. And here we will give the ID of our cluster page as target, some title that is displayed on the cluster menu, and then some icon component that will display the icon. And it's referencing certificate icon component that we can introduce as well. So this icon component will render icon component from Lens Extensions API, and it will use security icon from material icons and have some tooltip. So now we have registered these components to Lens Extensions API or with Lens Extensions API. And then we need to implement this CRD class that we want to use with our extension, and API and store objects, how we can fetch those objects or resources from Kubernetes API. So to define the CRD object, we just extend cube object class from Lens Extensions API and give it the kind property. It should match the CRD definition, and we will define that it's namespace, and the base API route or base API path that is used to fetch those, how those CRDs are fetched from Kubernetes API. And then just define those properties that the CRD definition is having. And to create those objects for API and store, we can utilize Lens Extensions API. So for the API, we just extend again base class from Lens Extensions API, Cube API class at this time. And we will create object and export that object. And we will give our CRD class as object constructor. And then we define certificate class that is using this API and create instance for the store class from the store class and register the store to Lens API manager. You might wonder, what are these stores and APIs? So basically this store is something that is containing the resources that are coming from Kubernetes API. And that store needs some reference to Kubernetes API, how it actually fetches those. So we are using or defining some API that is used to fetch those resources. So by doing this, we can use this certificate store to fetch our CRD certificates CRDs from Kubernetes API. And this API is having all credentials and whatnot. So you don't need to worry about that. You can just use it as. Okay, now we have this CRD and an API and a store object defined. So we can actually create the component that will render those CRDs. So basically, we just extend our page component from React component and define how it render things. And to make things easier, Lens Extensions API is exposing a couple of handy components. So this cube object list layout is the component that will take the store as property, and it will automatically fetch those items and render those in table-like component on the Lens app. So we just need to pass the store, give some search file filters. Optionally, we can also define some sorting columns and definitions, how these columns are stored. Then we just need to give some title and define header columns and the actual content columns. And that's all. So now we have a certificate page that will render those CRD objects. And then we can customize the details panel that is opened when clicking one item. Again, we need to register something on our extension class. It's very similar as we done earlier. So we just need to register cube object details item. And here we will give some Kubernetes kind property that these details items are handled for this kind objects and with these API versions. And when those are matching, we will display this component on that details panel. So every time we are clicking certificate that is using these API versions, on the side panel will be rendered this component. And what is inside that component? So it's a React component that is rendered. It will get the certificate object as property. And then we can use drawer item from Lens Extensions API to have common look and feel how all other stuff are rendered on the side panel. And we just render some data or information from the certificate object. And what we need to do to see this in Lens app is we just need to command run npm run dev command, because it was defined in Package.json as script, and enable that extension in Lens app. So actually, I have this source code here on VS Code. And as you can see, it's the similar or the same. It has also these imports that I have stripped out from examples. But we can just run this npm run dev. It will compile this extension. And we should see it here on lens extension section. Actually, it's might be already enabled. Yes, it's here. And we can see it here on the cluster site menu with correct icon. And on this cluster, I don't have any certificates. So let's try another one. All right, and here we have, it will automatically, the component fetch those certificates from Kubernetes API. And when clicking this, it will open that details panel. And how we can develop these extensions, actually, we can just edit this. For example, change the title. Where is the title? Save it. This will be automatically detected change and rebuild or recompiled. We just need to refresh this page and we will see the change immediately. So it's quite easy to develop this. You don't need to compile or build Lens IDE on your machine. You just need to develop your extensions and enable those on Lens IDE, and you can develop your extension and see how is it working in the Lens app. So when you are ready with your extension, you are thinking that now it's at that point that it can be published. So how to publish that? So in order to able to install extension in Lens app, it needs to be npm package, and you can very easily do that by running npm pack command. And when that is done and you have this tarball available, you need to put that someplace where it's publicly available for download. For example, it can be asset on GitHub release etc. And those extensions then can be installed by providing URL to that extension or by downloading that package and browsing and selecting it from file system, like we have the starboard, for example. And the complete source code for this example, you can find it from GitHub and from our Lens app repo, organization and the Lens extension samples repository. There are other samples too. So when you are starting to implement your own extensions, you can take a look on those and see how things are implemented there. Or reading documentation, checking the API documentation, what components are exposed, and that kind of stuff. And if you need any help, Edward shared the link for you. You can come to our community Slack channel, and there are plenty of people that are willing to help if you have any issues or questions you need answers.
All right, great. Thank you, Laurie, for your presentation today. We really appreciate you taking the time for this. I'd like to announce the winners of our raffle for the Lens hoodie. So the winners are Prasad, Miriala, and Richard. So I message both of you, please email me to coordinate your shirt size and shipping. Laurie, do you still have time to answer any more questions?
Yes, I have. So.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, we're a little bit over time. So let's see. Does anyone have questions? Let's see. Stefan has a question. How could we get the extension of resources map?
I still need to polish it a bit, but when it's done, I will make it publicly available. So I think same is for the invaders thing too. So.
All right. Any other questions? All right, if there's no more questions, then thanks everyone for joining today, and we'll see you next time.